Hello, it's Jimmy, and this is going to be another one of my videos about the books I've read in 2018. Today I'm going to talk about two books which are sort of memoirs in a way. They've got autobiographical elements, one of them more so than the other. So I'm going to talk about I Can't Date Jesus and Other Reasons I Put My Faith in Beyonce by Michael Arceneaux. And I'm going to talk about Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. I Can't Date Jesus and Other Reasons I Put My Faith in Beyonce by Michael Arceneaux is, I think, a collection of personal essays or a memoir or an autobiography. I listened to it on audiobook, so it all flowed sort of continuously, and I'm not sure how it was published, but I think each chapter is kind of an independent essay in a way, but they all tie together to form a kind of an autobiography of Michael Arceneaux, who is this American writer. He grew up in the south of the US in a very religious family, and then he went and left home and went to university and became a writer and lived in different cities in the US. And he talks about how he discovered his sexuality as a gay man, starting from his experiences in childhood and then meeting people and those sorts of things as they develop as an adult. A lot of it's about relationships, both sexual relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, relationships with his barbers, relationships with his family. I first heard about it on this pop culture and politics podcast, Keep It, which is my favourite American podcast. And Michael Arceneaux was being interviewed on there, and one of the things he said about the book was that he felt like he could have sold it more easily if it was a very sort of a poor me type story. But he didn't want to buy into that expectation of a black American gay man from the south of the US talking about his experience must be through the lens of suffering. For me, it feels very chatty, maybe partly because I listened to it on audiobook, which is read by Michael Arceneaux, the author himself. It feels very chatty. It feels a little bit confessional. It feels quite gossipy. Michael Arceneaux is very honest about the people he's come across in his life. It's a little bit no holds barred, which is fun to read or listen to if you are a bit of a gossip like me. It's really touching in parts as well. There's one part where it really feels like it was written for his mother, so it feels almost voyeuristic reading it and not being his mother. It's sort of I feel like he's saying things that he has said to her directly, but maybe she hasn't heard or something like that. And he knows that she's probably not going to read this book or this essay, and if she does, she's probably not going to change her ways of a lifetime, but he's really hoping she does because their relationship is very important to him, but there are still these issues hanging over it that he would love to see resolved. But it's not clear how possible that will be for them ever to be resolved. So that's really touching. But the book as a whole, it's funny, it's gossipy, it's a ride through the past couple of decades of pop music and the story of a writer on his way up, finding his way in the world, meeting people. So I enjoyed it. I think it's a good book. I think it's worth listening to the audiobook as well, like I did. And the next book I'm going to talk about, I also listened to on audiobook and is also read by the author, and which I also recommend listening to because I enjoyed it that way very much. But I enjoyed it so much that I went on to buy 2 physical copies of it, one for my partner and one for my sister for her birthday. So I have my partner's copy here. It's Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. So this book is much less an autobiography, memoir, personal essay thing than Michael Arceneaux's book, but it has elements of that. More than that, though, I like to call it a manifesto on food and eating. Ruby Tandoh is a chef. She was on Bake Off a few years ago, and she's got a couple of cookbooks out. I've got one of them, or my partner's got it, called Flavor, and I've made some things from that, and they've been tasty. Ruby Tandoh has had issues with eating in the past and her relationship with food, and coming out of that and then turning food into a career, and also food being at the heart of many of her relationships, and just being at the center of her life in a very conscious way is what I think led to the development of a lot of the thinking in this book. But we get a lot of different, often contradictory messages coming in about food. And most of us don't have any kind of deliberate, coherent framework in our minds, how we think about food, to handle that barrage, that chaotic barrage of different messages. And I think this book can serve as kind of providing a response to that barrage in a way. So a lot of it is about challenging unhelpful food messages. It's sort of about the specialness of eating without depending on a particular mode of eating or way of eating. It's sort of not about eating in a certain way, or certainly not eating in a certain way all the time, but about how every way of eating has its moment. I'm going to read the blurb to convey what it's about because I feel like I'm not doing a great job of explaining it. So, Eat Up is about food, but it's not about calories and vitamins, making sourdough from scratch, or cutting down on dairy. Instead, it's about the buttery crunch of a plate of Marmite toast. It's about the sharp fizz of a can of ice-cold pop. It's about the sheer joy, pleasure, and meaning that can be found in food every single day. Because food really matters. From breast milk to prison meals, KFC to mum's roast chicken, what we eat is part of who we are. Offering practical advice, recipes, heart-filling pep talks, and wisdom from the likes of Nora Ephron and Gemma from Towie, Eat Up is a radical manifesto that will make you laugh, think, and fall back in love with food. So I think that's a good summary of it, really. It challenges a lot of the food nonsense we get in our ears, and it sort of encourages us to feel good about the things that make us feel good. And it's got recipes in it. I've made one of them, which was tasty. That's the one reason I would suggest having a physical copy and not just the audiobook, is that it's harder to do the recipes from the audiobook than it is having it on the page. It's got little stories from her life. It's got references to films and books and pop culture in general. Overall, I think it's a brilliant book. I think that almost anyone would get something out of it, and I definitely recommend it. However you read it, however you eat, check it out.